Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for coming to the amphitheatre today. We are very, very honoured today to have two brilliant speakers. Andrew Lane, who is resident here at the London Amphitheatre, and John Dunford from the Society of Thames Mudlarks. John's got an amazing history of mudlarking knowledge in London and has a very special role in the amphitheatre. Between the two of them, we are very privileged to have them both speak about their discoveries here.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to do all the boring bits, so give you all the basics, and then John's going to tell you all the really interesting bits, and particularly the bits that I didn't know. So yeah, it's always nice being here because I always find out new things, discover new things about the amphitheatre and about Roman London in particular. And yeah, I'm the Learning and Engagement Officer at the City of London Corporation, and by training I'm an archaeologist. So here goes. A brief history of Roman London. So we're in the City of London, and the City of London was the Roman city, and if we look at a map of the City of London today, at various locations you can still see the medieval walls going around the outside of the city, and the medieval walls were built directly on top of the Roman walls, so they give us some idea of the extent of the Roman city. So you might just be able to make out that going all the way around the outside here, from the Tower of London in the east, over past St Paul's Cathedral in the west to just about where the Old Bailey is. That was the main part of Roman London, or Londinium as they would have called it. And the Romans invade Britain in AD 43, and very soon after that they found Londinium, and most of it is on the northern side of the river, but there's also a substantial part on the southern side of the river as well. And it's one of the interesting things about the archaeology of Roman London. As we find out more, we have to continually rewrite the history of Roman London. And if you'd have asked an archaeologist perhaps 40 years ago what was happening on the south side of the river, they probably would have said, not very much really. Whereas today, because there's been so many recent or fairly recent excavations, we're aware of a lot more occupation and activity on the south side of the river. So that just gives you a very basic idea of where we are in terms of London, and also a few dates. So let's get on to the discovery of the Roman amphitheatre. And I'm going to start off with this lovely old photograph. I do like a good photograph. That shows the site of the Guildhall Yard. You might just be able to make out part of the dance porch of the Guildhall on the left-hand side. And it shows the original Guildhall Art Gallery. And the original art gallery was opened by the City of London Corporation, a body that runs and still runs this particular part of London. It was opened in 1876, and it was taking its lead from lots of other big metropolitan councils which around this time were opening art galleries for the public good. So the City of London thought, yes, we're going to open one, and it chose as the location for that first Guildhall Art Gallery what was a Georgian court building on the yard. So a building that was about 200 years old. And we know that as soon as it opened, this was a great success. We're busy today, but we have records from the first Guildhall Art Gallery that records people queuing back as far as the Bank of England to come and visit temporary exhibitions we've got on. So visitor numbers that we can only dream about. So a great success. Moving very quickly on, I'm sure lots of you are aware that this particular part of London was very heavily damaged during the Second World War, and that included the Guildhall, but also the Guildhall Art Gallery. So after the Second World War, all that was left of the Guildhall Art Gallery was that lower section of the building. And it always seems amazing to me to think that this is how it remained until approximately 1987. So this site in the middle of the city, a really important ceremonial site, remained looking quite ruinous. But in 1987, or I should say previously, just a few years before that, to celebrate the centenary of the opening of the first art gallery, they decided they were going to put a purpose-built gallery on this site. Because we are, as we've seen, in the middle of what would have been the Roman city, before they could start work on that new art gallery, they had to bring in a team of archaeologists just to check that there was nothing of particular importance that was going to be disturbed with the new building. Now, over the years, there have been several small-scale excavations in the vicinity of the courtyard, and in those excavations, they hadn't found anything of particular interest, so they thought that when they started digging here, it was going to be a fairly routine excavation. But, of course, as so often happens with archaeology, exactly the opposite turned out to be true. So they started digging down, and it was a really complex excavation with lots of later foundations going through the site. And the Roman levels here and across much of Roman London are found between 6 and 7 metres underground. So a very difficult site to excavate, as I'm sure John will mention later. They excavated down, they found archaeology almost straight away, they found the remains of burials, probably dating to the 17th century, probably connected to the church of St Lawrence Jury on one side of the courtyard. Dug down further, they found the remains of a medieval chapel connected to the medieval Guildhall. Dug down further, they found the remains of houses from the 12th, 13th century. But with time running out on their excavation window across what was a huge archaeological site, they decided to open 6 comparatively small trenches just to check there was nothing of Roman date here. In 2 of those trenches, they didn't find anything of particular importance. In the other 4 trenches, luckily enough, they stumbled across sections of Roman wall. It wasn't immediately obvious to the archaeologists what they'd found. A few more weeks' worth of work, they were able to establish that these 4 small sections of wall that they'd found were all built at exactly the same level. They were all built using the same construction techniques, and that indicated that they all belonged to the same building. A little bit more work, and they've uncovered a curved section of wall. And in Roman architecture, the Romans like their buildings a little bit like their roads, nice and straight. So when you find a curved section of wall which is over 1 metre wide, it means you've got 1 or 2 types of building. So it was only then that the archaeologists started to get really excited. And in 1988, they announced to the press that they'd found the remains of Londinium's Roman Amphitheatre. And Roman cities, especially important Roman cities, would be embellished with a whole series of public buildings. One of those buildings would be an amphitheatre. So archaeologists had always suspected that there would be an amphitheatre to be found, but up until that point, they hadn't known where it was. So it made the headlines in the press. It was announced as being the most important archaeological discovery in London for over 100 years. Great news for archaeologists. Not such great news for the developers of the site. The government immediately protected the remains of the Roman Amphitheatre, and it meant that all of those plans they had for the new art gallery had to be redesigned in order that the remains could be preserved and accommodated within the new building. So, a very difficult task. So, the discovery in 1988, the opening of the art gallery, 1999, and the opening of the Roman Amphitheatre, 2002. So a very long delay. But as an archaeologist, I think it's all been very much worthwhile. So what exactly did the archaeologists find? They found part of London's Roman Amphitheatre. And basically we have part of one of 2 principal entrances, part of the east entrance. So these long walls we've got here lines the entrance on either side, and then we've got that curved wall, which was a real giveaway for the archaeologists going around here, the arena wall. So part of the Roman Amphitheatre. But we've got enough of the Roman Amphitheatre to reconstruct it in some detail and to be fairly confident in that reconstruction. Just to show that on the plan, so that's how we reconstruct Londinium's Roman Amphitheatre, and it's that entrance on the east of the amphitheatre. Subsequently, there's been a couple of small-scale excavations. on the south side of the courtyard, very close to the church, where they decided to put in those security bollards that you may have walked past as you came into the courtyard. Of course, they weren't expecting to find anything of particular importance, but they found possibly part of the exterior wall of the amphitheatre just there. So that was 1999. And yeah, that's how we think our Roman amphitheatre would have looked in the 2nd century AD. The first Roman amphitheatre was built shortly after the founding of Roman London, so in about AD 70. And then by the time we get into the 2nd century AD, Roman London needs something slightly grander, something slightly bigger. So the amphitheatre gets rebuilt on a more impressive scale. And whereas the first Roman amphitheatre was built entirely of wood, the second Roman amphitheatre is built with a mixture of stone and brick and also wood. And there we go, our very famous green men. And today, the remains of the Roman amphitheatre, which have never moved, they sit within the new Guildhall Art Gallery. There we go. So we've got the remains just here. It's another story, another talk, talking about how those remains were preserved. But they preserved the remains, and then they carried on digging out the foundations for the new Guildhall Art Gallery. So underneath the amphitheatre, when you're down there looking at all these wonderful Mudlarkers finds, we've actually got 2 further floors of storage space underneath where you're standing. So that's how the Roman remains sit within the gallery. And I don't want to talk too much about the amphitheatre itself, but just 1 or 2 interesting features. I know John's going to talk about the drains in a few minutes' time, but we have some wonderfully preserved wooden drains. And when I talked quite confidently about the first Roman amphitheatre being AD 70, lots of our dating for the amphitheatre actually comes from the wood that was incorporated into various parts of the drains. So using dendrochronology, looking at that sequence of tree rings, we know that part of the drains were constructed from wood that was felled or cut down around about AD 70. So that's where we're getting our first date for the Roman amphitheatre. We also know that they're making repairs to the drains 250 years later. So that would indicate that the amphitheatre is still in use. So, as I like to point out to primary school groups when they come, not only are they in London's oldest sporting venue of types, but they're also in London's longest lived sporting venue, because, yeah, Wembley Stadium's got a few years to go before it reaches 250. And the other thing to mention is we've got 2 rooms flanking our eastern entrance, and in one of those rooms, it's a little bit difficult to see because there's lots of far more interesting things in front of it today, but we've got some very nice threshold stones. And what's interesting about these, where our archaeologist has got her hand on that side, but more clearly on the other side, we've got 2 grooves cut into the stone, and we think from other better preserved Roman amphitheatres that this would have been used for inserting the lowest part of a wooden vertically opening trapdoor, so a little bit like this on the far side. So we can be fairly certain that this small room on the south side of the entrance was used for keeping wild animals in before they were released into the arena. We have no particular evidence for the other room on the far side of the eastern entrance, but possibly that was used for keeping the gladiators in. And anyone who's been to one of the better preserved Roman amphitheatres, the Colosseum in Rome, or one of those in the south of France, with all of those underfloor passages for your animals and for your gladiators, that works well if you're somewhere nice and dry. But if you're somewhere that's slightly wetter, i.e. Londinium 2,000 years ago, you need to keep your animals and your gladiators at ground level. So just a reminder of how we think that second Roman amphitheatre, and most of what you can see downstairs today belongs to that second Roman amphitheatre would have looked like. Final thing to mention is the seating. The seating in both the first and the second Roman amphitheatre was always of wood. Archaeologists, we didn't find very much of this seating, but what we did find is lots of the post pads from the bottoms of the holes on which this infrastructure was sited, and we found enough of these post pads to work out how far back the seating would have gone, and by comparing that to other better preserved Roman amphitheatres, they've been able to work out that there would have been between 12 and 15 rows of seats. And initially, when we first opened the amphitheatre in 2002, we thought that that seatage would give a capacity of about 6,000. As so often happens with archaeology, an academic has come along, has studied how the Romans would have sat in an amphitheatre or another big public building, has decided to seat those spectators slightly closer together. So we have been able to increase our capacity in the amphitheatre from 6,000 to 7,000 to 10,500. So that would make it one of the largest Roman amphitheatres in the country, but obviously comparatively small compared to the Colosseum in Rome. And just to give you some idea of the scale, you may have noticed when you came into the yard that we've got in the pavement a line of dark stone which is marked out. It sort of also continues around here, and then if we can see the rest of the yard, somewhere over here. And that curved line, which was of course the real giveaway for the archaeologists when they discovered it, that marks the line of the arena at the centre of the amphitheatre. So the space that it demarcates, that's where all the action would have happened. That's the arena itself. And it gives you some idea of the enormous scale of that Roman amphitheatre. Just in case anyone's interested, I mentioned the capacity for that amphitheatre is 7,000 to 10,500, and we think that would be out of a population for Roman London of approximately 20 to 30,000. So a large proportion of Roman London could be sat in the amphitheatre. It's of course not the only Roman amphitheatre that's been found in excavations around Britain. Chester has a particularly well-preserved one, Caerleon, Silchester can still be seen, but there's at least 11 Roman amphitheatres that you can see around the country. And just to give you some idea of scale, the largest are London and Chester, and I had to work this out. It's one of those sad things that archaeologists had to do. London's Roman amphitheatre has a capacity of about 25% in terms of ground plan to the Colosseum in Rome. The Colosseum in Rome, London's Roman amphitheatre would have had a capacity of up to 10,500. The Colosseum in Rome, we think possibly 50,000, so much, much larger. And in terms of what it was used for, all the things that we normally associate a Roman amphitheatre with, we think that when you went to the games, you would have gone for the day. It was something that didn't happen very often. There tended to be trained athletes or gladiators fighting against wild animals in the morning. Lunchtime was reserved for executions, something nice to have with the sandwiches. And then it was the afternoon that you really wanted to be there because it was the afternoon when you would see the gladiators. So a little bit of information about London's Roman amphitheatre.
Good afternoon. I'm not been a speaker for a long time, so just bear with me. I've got some notes to refer to. So just right. The gentleman there is a member of the Society of Thames Mudlarks, and there's another gentleman just behind him. This is a riverside site. You can tell it's a riverside site. There's the amount of mud and water on the site. They're working alongside archaeologists, recovering artefacts, coins and artefacts from the building site. You can see where the concrete remains of the footings are still there. And you've got a JCB, which is disposing of the mud as it's being dug out. In the 1980s, the building regulations were relaxed and taller buildings were allowed, which meant they needed deeper foundations. So excavations were going back past the Victorian level. That's probably the Victorian level there, 17th, and then you get down into 16th, 15th, and down to the Roman level. So this was basically a rescue operation. The contractors, the archaeologists had a watching brief on the building sites, and every so often they were allowed to dig down, and they would phone up the members of the Mudlarks and say, could you arrange for someone to come out on the day, or 2 days at a particular time. So just a brief history of the Society of Thames Mudlarks and Antiquarians. They basically formed in the late 70s. They were a group of men and women who searched the Thames foreshore and had a recording history with the Museum of London showing them the finds. The Portland Authority came along and banned them. But Brian Spencer, the head of the Museum of London at the time, along with the Crown Estates, had a big meeting with the PLA and the Mudlarks, and they come up with a licensing idea to license the Mudlarks. That's one of my early forms of Mudlarking licence, 4 pages of do's and don'ts. Now it's all computerised and you just get a little card, but you've still got 4 or 5 pages of do and don'ts on the internet.
Which we still do have, don't we,
Yeah,
basically?
yeah. So basically, Brian Spencer was the driving force because he realised that the Mudlarks were saving history from the Thames foreshore. Because at the time, the archaeologists didn't realise that the Thames foreshore was a layered structure. It's basically a rubbish tip. People have been dumping stuff in the Thames for 2,000 years. So they were calling members in and we would search the spoil heap. Which, just bear with me. Here's another one. This is a spoil from the Thames Exchange in London. It was a massive big site. You can see the Dartford Bridge in the background, the River Thames. This is at Stone at Dartford. And lorry loads of spoil were coming down from London. The lorries were numbered. There's probably a stick there with a number on it. And you had a plastic bag. So all the finds from that spoil heap you put in the plastic bag, which referenced with the Thames Exchange site. So at the end of the day, the bags of finds would go off to the museum, and they could tie up the finds to the spot they came from the Thames Exchange. These were all volunteers. You did it on your day off or the weekend. This particular site we covered 7 days a week, 24 hours. So 50 members. Divide that, and we cover that as basically as security, also searching the spoil heaps. So he's sometimes out there at night with a torch, digging away, covering stuff. All weathers, there was no protection. They gave us a porter cabin with a microwave. And that was it. Somebody brought in a bed from home, a mattress. So if you wanted to sleep, you could get your head down for a couple of hours. And the nearest pub was a fair walk away, but you couldn't park on site. You had to park quite a way away, so the nearest pub was quite a way away. So how did we get invited onto sites? The archaeology of the Museum of London realised that they had not enough staff to cover sites, building sites going on. So they invited members to come along. Sorry, wrong button. So this is beneath us about here somewhere, right? Yeah, about here somewhere. So what's the date? I've forgotten the date.
It's probably 15th century.
15th century. So this is before mobile phones, so I did take a camera one day and took a picture of it, because I quite liked about that in my garden, but it went on the lorry load to the tip. But what was interesting about this is behind there was a Saxon walkway, actually, and you had all branches interwoven as the walkway. And either side of the walkway you had post holes from Saxon buildings. And they reckon it was basically the high street of the day. So you walked up and down the Saxon road and you got your food and your drink from the little shops either side. And while I was searching, one of the archaeologists there come up with a pair of iron shears like that. And one of the handles had been broken off and was missing. So they asked me to search the spoil heaps, and what you're going to do is it was about an hour and a half searching the spoil heap to find the handle. I found it. So it's complete set. I'll just go back a second. When I first went on the site, we invited on. It wasn't as deep as this, but you had the spoil heap in one corner, which we were allowed to search. And all you were finding were copper nails, inch and a half, 2 inch copper nails. And the other half of the site, you had men and women dressed up in white suits, gloves, face masks, digging out the bones from the cemetery. So what we were finding were coffee nails. So I think I spent about an hour there. I thought, well, it's not for me. Not so you see bits of human bones in the spoil heap, and I thought, well, that's not. A couple of things I found on the site. We found loads of Roman coins, plenty of Roman coins. Probably on every visit you're finding 20, 25 Roman coins. And this popped up. It's a bit of lead. And it's got Edward the Confessor. It's one of his coins stamped on it. It's probably would have been attached to a bolt or cloth or something to show you paid the tax. It's probably imported into the country. You paid your tax at the entry, and that will show that you paid it. And there are eagles, and there are four eagles in each one. So, so that's the site. That's the Roman level. As you can see, it was open to the elements, and the contractors very obligingly built these structures to cover the top. And they went all the way along. It enabled everybody to search in the weathers, because you imagine if it was wet and miserable, you wouldn't be able to do much work there. So it must have cost them a small fortune to build these. I think there's 6 or 7 of these structures going across. And these are the Roman levels. The Roman drain. That's the oak covering the drain, and that's still got the water running through it. I suppose you're still working after all these years. We found a lot of coins down the side of the drains. As if they worked their way down, when it rained, got washed into it, or just worked their way through it. This particular part of the drain is quite important, because the best find I had is going to come up next. And I tended to work with an archaeologist. I was working with this archaeologist, we were just talking, he was scraping away. I was searching, I come up with a few little Roman coins, but it'd been quite a quiet day. We were just talking, I said, well, because he was there a week, I said, anything come up recently? He said, no, I said, it's just a few coins, nothing of any interest. Then the next 5 minutes later, that popped up. So it was classed as a Roman earring. So that's the leaf design, got a little sort of serrated edge there. Comes down to a pearl, a freshwater pearl. That's British pearl, and they're not quite as good as the foreign pearls, so they say in the book. But that was lying alongside the drain, and that's how it came up. You didn't need to wash it off or anything, it just came up. So you can imagine the young lady, or quite a wealthy lady, probably watching the games, got excited, jumped up and down, the English come off. When she's got home, she's thought, oh no, I've lost it. It's gone forever. And a few 1500 years later it's turned up. So, yeah. I mean, there's quite a few bits and pieces turned up on there's a book on there that shows you can have a look through quite a few of the artefacts.
Where is it now?
It's on display.
So if anyone wants to look...
Yeah, it's actually on display. Well, they call it a clasp now. When it first came up, it was described as an earring, but now they've reclassified it as a clasp. I can't quite see how it would work as a clasp.
So is that in the wall where the...
Yeah, it's not very good display, yeah. It's sort of hidden into the wall, yeah.
So we'll show you afterwards if anyone wants to see it.
So that was quite... It made a quiet day, quite a good day. It happens. You go for ages and ages with nothing, and then something pops up. So at the end of the... so this was a reenactment. Once the Guildhall was open and that, and I took the children, 3 children up to show them around the building. Also, they did the reenactment here. This chap here has actually got a hammerhead on his... See the hammerhead? Mm-hmm. Excuse me. And what it's used is this poor chap's been, he's lost his fight, he's probably bleeding to death, so he would come out, bash him over the head and finish him off. And they just drag him off. But what there is, I'm not sure it's in that book, they actually found that hammerhead, or that one, but a replica, the original one, on the site when I was digging through. But it was quite an exciting day. I mean, everybody was cheering. You can imagine how at the time the young lady with the loss of hearing. There's another one. The horses coming in chariots. And then they had female gladiators fighting the men gladiators, and the female gladiators won easily. And that's my sort of talk.
Quite finished yet. We've got a little bit more of me, I'm afraid. I'm just thinking how things have changed, because I don't know if anyone saw as they came past this particular part of the courtyard, but underneath this today we've got a Banksy, which appeared on Ludgate Hill. It's an old police post, and Banksy had put piranhas on the inside, and it was sort of, what do we do with this? But it's been moved for health and safety reasons. Underneath that today, it's not the Romans you'd see a Banksy. So things are continually changing here, but I think it's wonderful because I didn't realise, all the years I've been here, and I've looked at the book with the earring, the clasp, but I just assume that it's been found by an archaeologist, when of course, I should be thanking the Mudlarkers for that wonderful. But just one or two of the other things that have been found. Okay, here we have a Roman soldier, and I've been told by academics that actually the Roman Amphitheatre was very well maintained, so possibly they didn't find the archaeologists working on this site as much as they would normally expect to find on a Roman site. So we have our very tidy Roman soldier, but they still found lots of other things. I'm just going to mention a few of them, and several of these pieces are on display. So as you go down to the cloakrooms on the right-hand side, where we've got the Heritage Study Room, you'll be able to see them in the window there. But this is one of the most interesting, because what we have is, we believe, part of a Roman military belt buckle. And it's quite nice, because if we go back very quickly to our view of the city, you might just be able to see that in this corner, just over here, so the amphitheatre is just here, but almost adjacent to the amphitheatre, we have the remains of the Roman fort. So we think of the amphitheatre as being used for the gladiators and all those horrible activities, but it was also, at least for part of its history, it would also have possibly been used by the military as a parade ground. So a Roman military buckle. They also found, and again there's some wonderful examples of these, I think, if you're wandering around with the Mudlarkers downstairs, lots of Roman bone hairpins. including one that's decorated with, I think it's the god Minerva. And of course, these are all really interesting because they can start to tell us about the people who may have attended the games. Because we've seen the earring, if you're a Roman with a gold earring, even if it's a gold earring with a British pearl, it still means you're a member of the elite. So it's suggesting that the audience in the amphitheatre may have been a mixed audience with wealthy ladies. Bone hairpins like this. Hairpins would have been made from lots of different materials. These are really your entry-level hairpins. If you had lots of money, you might have a hairpin that was made of metal, you might have a hairpin that was made of gold. But they would have been used by Roman ladies to keep their elaborate hairstyles in place. We can see wonderful hairstyles. On the left we have some marble heads from the Louvre, and it's not particularly clear, but on the right hand side we've got one of, I don't know if anyone's seen them before, but they're one of the mummy portraits, the Fayum mummy portraits from Egypt. And this particular example is in the British Museum. Again, that similar elaborate hairstyle. Yeah, we can see this is a wealthy lady, lots of jewellery, but it's not particularly clear. But at the top, we've got a gold hairpin, so keeping her hair in place. So again, a mixed audience, but not necessarily just wealthy ladies, but possibly less elite ladies. We also found lots of Samian ware, as you find in excavations across Britain, across most of the Roman world. This particular example, again, is on show downstairs. We can see our two gladiators fighting. They analysed the finds of Samian wares, and an unusually high proportion of those finds have scenes of the amphitheatre on them. So whether that's scenes of gladiators fighting, whether that's scenes of animal hunts. So it's been suggested, and we know from other sites it's something that definitely would have happened, that if you went to the amphitheatre 2,000 years ago, it was a big occasion, it wasn't going to happen that often. You might, just as you might want to today, purchase a souvenir of the games. What better souvenir than a bowl, a piece of pottery that you would be able to use, but one that was decorated with a scene of the amphitheatre. So possibly we have evidence for early souvenirs found during the excavations here. We also found lead curses. And lead curses, very thin pieces of lead, often with inscriptions across the front of them, and they would have been a little bit like a prayer that you would make to a god or a goddess, and usually you were asking for something. And the best preserved of the three examples that were found in the amphitheatre is a lead curse with an inscription across the front, and the inscription is a dedication to the god Diana, who was the huntress god. And it appears that someone, possibly who was attending the games, had items of clothing stolen, and is asking the goddess to take revenge on the person that stole those items of clothing. And I quite like that, because it means the Romans are so very different to us in so many respects, but possibly, I'm sure we've all been to big venues, and you're slightly worried about whether your items are going to be there at the end of the performance. It seems that some things in London haven't changed that much. Items were being stolen here 2,000 years ago. So a very nice lead curse. And the final thing I wanted to mention was a huge tranche of cullet or glass, Roman glass, that was going to be used in the glass making process. So glass that was being recycled. And this was one of the largest finds in Roman Britain. I didn't mean to look up exactly how many pieces were found. It's in the 10,000, something approaching that. And they were found in the amphitheatre. And I mentioned that the amphitheatre was probably used for about 250 years. The amphitheatre goes out of use before the end of the Roman period. So the amphitheatre goes in, or becomes disused somewhere in the mid-4th century, towards the end of the 4th century, but before the Romans traditionally leave Britain in the early 5th century. And when the Romans can no longer afford to put on the games, they can no longer afford to maintain the amphitheatre, they recycled most of the material of the amphitheatre. So one of the reasons we don't have more of the amphitheatre downstairs is that the Romans actually recycled most of the material before the end of the Roman period. And afterwards, because it was a wet, boggy area of ground, it gets used for dumping things. And that includes lots of glass that was originally intended to be recycled. And we know from subsequent excavations that this particular part of London was used. There's lots of evidence for glass processing and for glass firing in this particular part of London. So it's telling us a little bit about what's going on in the vicinity of the amphitheatre.
I actually went up on the site one day, and the spoil was heaped up, and amongst, you could see all this Roman glass in the spoil. There's a little bit over there. I just felt a bit awkward. I picked up 4 or 5 bits. I wish I picked up more. But I always kept it. It's just in a little display case over there. It is beautiful glass.
I know John said, well, slightly tentative. I've got these little bits of glass that were found during the excavation. I said, don't worry, there's about another 10,000 pieces somewhere else.
I always regret not picking up more.
And lastly, skeletons. Apart from later bones, they didn't find very many Roman bones. There were a couple of late burials after the amphitheatre has gone into disuse. But one of the questions I'm asked most when we have primary school visits is, oh, did you find any bones? And of course, the answer is yes, they found lots of bones, but not the ones you're really interested in, because what they found is lots of animal bones, but those are animal bones from an abattoir, and they're dumped on the ground after the amphitheatre falls into disuse. So not those wild animals that you were perhaps hoping to find. So I'm just going to finish on 2 images of Roman London as it would have looked. The first image, anyone of a certain age might recognise the name Alan Sorrell, name that I grew up with when I was taken around ancient sites many, many years ago. There was always a reconstruction by Alan Sorrell. And we're lucky enough, it's not on public show, but we have it hanging within the complex. We have a wonderful reconstruction of Roman London from the early 1960s. And it's a view looking from, you might just be able to make it out in the corner here, we've got the Roman fort. So looking from the Roman fort across the city, past the huge Basilica Forum complex, and then down towards the River Thames. And I'm sorry, it's quite small, but anyone at the front might just be able to make out that behind the smoke here, we have a plot of land with not very much happening on it. And of course that's where the amphitheatre would subsequently be found. So in our second updated view, from the same angle looking across Roman London, here we have the Roman fort, and we also have the amphitheatre added in. So the story of London's Roman amphitheatre and of Roman London is one that's continually being updated. We find new buildings, we find out how things were really discovered when the excavations were happening. So, thank you very much for listening. We are happy to take questions about the Romans, about the amphitheatre, about mudlarking. So if anyone has any questions, please just let me know. At the back.
Just when people were killed in the little games, what did they do with the bodies? Do you know?
Good question. Okay. We think that they may have been buried. We think that if you were a gladiator, you were amongst the lowest in Roman society. You're right the way down there at the bottom. So if you were buried, you would probably be buried separately to everyone else. And in terms of gladiators, every now and again they find some bones in London which possibly have got wounds which could possibly belong to a gladiator. Or otherwise they find some bones that have things associated with the games close to them. but it's very rare to actually find a gladiator burial intact. We quite often find the tombstones, and they're quite interesting because they tell us that, you know, if a gladiator was able to afford a stone or a marble tombstone, they're quite wealthy. They also quite often give us lots of detail that we wouldn't get from any other sources. So the number of times that a gladiator might be fighting before they passed away. But there is one definite burial that we can say is a Roman gladiator, and that was found in Ephesus in Turkey, where they've got the tombstone and they've got the related bones underneath. And as far as I'm aware, that's the only intact gladiator burial that we have. So possibly they would be buried, and if they were a successful gladiator, they would be buried with a nice memorial. I probably think that lots of others were just very quickly disposed of.
Was there like a VIP section, could you say, like something for higher classes to sit? So
Absolutely. We can just, I won't go back through. Yeah, we think, and we don't have any particular evidence for it from London's Roman Amphitheatre, but we do from other amphitheatres. The seating, we think, because Roman society was very hierarchical, the seating would have been carefully controlled. So in our reconstruction, yes, we've got two boxes where the dignitaries would be sitting. So it's the dignitaries that would be sponsoring the games, so they would want to be seen, but they would also want to be separated from everyone else. So almost certainly there would be special places for the dignitaries to sit. And I'm quite often asked about ladies, and ladies going to the amphitheatre. We talked about elite ladies. One of the Roman authors mentions the Colosseum in Rome and how that was divided up, and the space for ladies and slaves was right at the back level of the Colosseum. So possibly, yeah, it was divided up. I think what we can say is that, yeah, the elite would have the best views, and yeah, those who are not elite would have worse views. So it was definitely divided up. And it's interesting, if you look at the Colosseum in Rome, with the 80 entrances that go around the outside, above each of the 80 arches there's a number, and you would have got a ticket to go to the Colosseum in Rome, and your ticket would have taken you to a certain entrance. And those entrances, depending on which one you use, either go straight up to the top rows of the amphitheatre, or if you're a member of the elite, you go directly into what would have been the best seats around the arena. So it's definitely divided up in some way. We have no particular evidence for Roman London, and we're very much looking at other amphitheatres and the literary sources when we come to that conclusion.
Is there anything more to be said about the location of the amphitheatre? Is it more than coincidence that it's close to the fort barracks?
So when the amphitheatre was first built, that first wooden amphitheatre was built. This shows Roman London at its most prosperous at the end of the 2nd century AD, possibly the start of the 3rd century. But when the first Roman amphitheatre was built in about AD 70, the area that was chosen was right on the periphery of the built city then. So they chose the location where there was land readily available. And some people have looked at the shape of the land, and there is a slight valley, so it could be that they're also taking advantage of the topography of the site. But I think it's been on the edge of the city when it was first built, which was the big draw of this site. And there are probably connections between that second Roman amphitheatre and the fort, because they're of a similar date.
What kind of animals would have been kept in the amphitheatre?
Okay, we have no particular evidence. I'd like to, it's probably not going to be those big Hollywood type films. I have to say I'm looking forward to Gladiator 2. It's probably going to be, we know for example that bears were taken from Scotland for the opening of the Colosseum. They were taken from Scotland all the way to Rome. So yeah, we might not have those exotic animals, but there's possibly bears, possibly bulls, those sorts of animals rather than the lions and the tigers. Because Roman London is important in terms of Britannia, but it's still very much on the edge of the Roman world.
Was there anything that was found that particularly surprised either of you? Although you weren't
Only on the
expecting.
first day, really. You'd seen the bones, human bones in the spoil. That was sort of off-putting. That was a bit. I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah.
But no.
From the era, of course.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's
Yeah.
yeah.
And I would say yes. I've had time to think about it. Downstairs in the display case, on the bottom shelf, you've got some Roman marble. And my specialist field is marble in architecture. And that specialist marble, they're small pieces. Some people have tried to suggest that they may have been used for decorating one of the boxes, but I think far more likely that is material that's been dumped on the amphitheatre site after it falls into disuse. But what's really interesting about those marbles is that we have a wonderful example of it's Greek porphyry, so it's coming from Greece, from somewhere near Sparta. We also have imperial porphyry, the purple stone, which is coming all the way from Egypt. And we've seen lots of goods which are being traded around the Roman world when we very quickly looked at some of those finds. But it's a reminder that yes, Roman London is very much on the periphery of the Roman world, but we still have small amounts of those materials which you would see in far greater quantities if you were in Rome. And it gives you that connection to other parts of the empire. So I think it's the stone that I think is quite amazing, or particularly interests me, I should say.
Yeah.
So just about mudlarking some more, just wanted to know how did you get into it and what are the most exciting experiences that you've had, and is there still lots more out there to find?
I started, when did I get married? 1979. Basically, when I got married, we had a house. I had a day off in the week. My wife worked Monday to Friday. So what do I do on my day off? I tried fishing, tried golf. We went down the coast one day and there's a guy walking along the beach with a metal detector. I said, well, that looks interesting. So I got on £20. It was basically useless really. So I joined a club, got permission to go on farms, started searching farms, finding coins. Mainly Georgian halfpennies and pennies, completely worn because they was in circulation for so long. Found some nice bits, went to the local museum, talked to the guy there, carried on, joined another club. One of the guys there was a mudlark. This is about early 80s. He invited me to come up to London to dig with him. So I got to know other mudlarks, eventually got invited to join the mudlarks, and recording history in the Museum of London as well. So that helped to get me in, at the permit. As the best finds, I'm going to think. Going back to the second picture, shows you the tip sites. There was also, I don't know if anybody knows, Crayford in Kent. It's basically marshland, and they were basically similar to that. They were reclaiming it, but it was completely deserted. And so the lorry loads were coming from London. We had permission to go on the tip sites to search the spoil. And what would happen? The lorry would turn up. We'd knock the back of the lorry up. He would drive off. As he drove off, his back went up, and he shoots the load. So basically, you didn't have to dig so much to dig it from the ton of rubbish. Draining. And there was 3 or 4 of us there, all a bit fed up as the lorry comes in. So it's a quick search. As we're searching, the bulldozer comes along and he's levelling the load. So he's like in there quick, boom, boom, boom. So 4 or 5 signals, put them in a pouch, put them in. And so the bulldozer spread the load, and then you have to get up. So standing there talking, and there's a big puddle, so I'm washing, well, I found a big lump of lead like that. So it's all full of mud, clinging to it, and I can see a face. So it's Thomas the Beckett looking back at me. It's a pilgrim's ankle about that size. So he's got his hat on, he's got his staff. On the back, he's kneeling, and he's got the 4 knights, and one's got his sword raised, cutting his head off. At the top is a little building. So imagine like a hot water bottle, you've got this container, it's been pierced, closed. At the top is a building, which is supposed to be heaven. His soul's going up to heaven. And in the 4 corners were 4 angels. That's in the Museum of London. That's probably,
Wow.
you see it, Brian Spencer's book, it's been in different, it pops up, it was in the Museum of London exhibition 2 years ago, on display. Yeah, so that's probably the most exciting one. My second best find. If you're interested.
Yeah.
It's a handle of a penknife. It's got a chap standing there with a skull under his arm, and on the back it's got another chap standing there, Spanish looking. It's all pierced, all nicely done, and on the side it's got RD 1591 stamped on the side. The blade's missing, the blade's gone. Found it on the Tower of London. It's been recorded twice under the pass system. So they just the museum gave it back to me. So when I retired, I worked in the charity shop and we had loads of books coming in. We had a book coming in about Tower of London, who was beheaded in the Tower of London. So I thought, RD, right. So I looked up. First one was Richard Dudley, Robert Dudley. But the dates didn't tie in, the dates didn't. So the second one was Richard Devereux. It's the second Earl of Essex. And he was born with a gold spoon in his mouth, a multi-millionaire at the time, playboy for the time. He was involved with Queen Elizabeth. Everything he'd done, he buggered up. He went to Ireland, lost the British troops and English troops in Ireland. He went off to Spain, which is where the knife came from. Somebody's told me it's a Spanish knife. So it's basically a pocket knife for eating an apple, or cutting something up small. So Richard Dudley, Richard Devereux, was the second Earl of Essex. He fell out with Elizabeth, instituted like a little rebellion, was taken prisoner, put in the tower, and basically it's the last person to have his head cut off on the green at the top of the tower. But what they used to do with their possessions, they used to break up after they're thrown into the Thames. So that's probably... It's a nice little piece, I can tell you another one. My wife's sitting over there, school teacher, and I got an invite to come to talk to the kids at school, one class. So I made some boxes up of bones and pottery and clay pipes and bits and pieces. So I go there, there's 3 classes, so like 100 kids, dozen teachers. So all these kids are sitting around and I've got a table with the phones and I was talking away. And all the kids are just looking at me, so I'm thinking, it's one of the first times I did a speech and I think I'm losing this, I'm not, so I said, any questions? And like 99 hands went up. So I went up and it was the best find. So I said, well, it's got to be my wife, isn't it?
I thought you was going to give him another find.
Oh.
I could talk about the pilgrim's ankle.
I just want to ask about the possibility of there being a Roman theatre anywhere.
I'd like to think there was. Yeah, a future discovery, possibly. There have been Roman theatres that have been found in Roman Britain. You would think a city of London's importance would have an amphitheatre, but would also have a theatre. So, possibly something to discover in the future. Somewhere in the heart of the city. So, I'd like to think so.
Everybody, I think we've been blessed to hear these stories, so can I have a big round of applause? John has some absolutely beautiful finds in the cabinet.
There's some Roman finds in there, but there's also the bit of glass I found from Guildhall on display.
John, come over here and show people it. Please, have a look.